Hello again. If you watched the first video, that's probably why you're here. We are talking about Shadow and Bone, and its structure, which I am arguing is very nice and easy to follow if you are writing epic fantasy or even just a regular standalone fantasy, and you are thinking about how to structure your story. So part one we talk about is a lot of world building and is driven by this question of, does Alina have magical powers? And we found out, yes indeed, because that's what this kind of story is. She does have magical powers. So we move into part two. And part two is extremely archetypal, although it does things differently than others in that it's the very YA academic, this person has something going on with them and they need to be trained and now they're at a school. And so we learn about the Grisha training grounds, we learn their social dynamics, who sits with who, how they relate to the Darkling. So this is all set in the frame of Alina trying to figure out how she's going to fit in with this new world that she's been thrust into and how she feels about it and whether or not it's going to work for her. And for the most part, it doesn't. But that's the question that drives it forward. So section two, which takes place with the training, and she's trying to learn, although maybe not trying very hard because she doesn't want to be there, about her new life and about the world and trying to make friends and doing a lot of typical YA things. And we can recognize this from Harry Potter, although it's a little bit less academic because it focuses on the emotional side of Alina and very much how she's going to deal with being basically forced into this life when she didn't want it, and she can't communicate with Mal, who's disappeared, not responding to her letters, and she's not eating, etc., etc. So it's a little bit different than, Harry Potter or something like that, or other books that are contemporary to this one, where someone has wanted to be part of a school or wanted to be trained or is pulled into a mentorship with someone when they have some kind of agency. So this focus is more on the emotional side, which I think makes it a little bit more interesting because you don't have long segments of explaining magic. Lee does a really good job of just kind of like trusting that we don't need to know how it works necessarily. We get just enough of the internal Alina feeling her magic and experimenting with it to be satisfied, I argue. So section two moves into section three. And how do we get to section three? Just at the moment where Alina has accepted that she is going to do this job and she feels like she can do it, and she has the performance in front of the court and all these guests where she is basically baptized as the Sun Summoner and everything is really awesome, and she's like, okay, we're good. Then she learns out that the Darkling is not so wonderful and has plans that basically would destroy a lot of people for this, the idea that he's going to save the world or bring peace or balance or whatever. And that shoots us into section three. And section three is Alina on the run, which is, again, another archetypal, very easy to recognize structure of a book, right? We have sometimes whole books where someone is on the run. But what's interesting about this is it's the first time that Alina is taking action since she has learned of her magical power. She's been pretty passive through the entire section two, but she can't live with this idea that the Darkling is going to use her as an amplifier to basically ruin the world or take over the world. So she runs. And we have a section of the running where she goes through different places in the world, and she's trying to figure out how she's going to survive, and she doesn't have a lot of plans, but then Mal finds her, which is a little bit improbable, but okay, fine. And then they're on the run together. Again, they don't have a lot of plans. It's a little bit messy. They encounter various obstacles. Again, very typical. And we're just thinking about getting away. So the driving thing is she going to get away from the Darkling? That's the question of section three. And that ends when they realize that there isn't really a way to get away from him. They have to go find the magical stag that's going to give Alina her superpowers on top of her regular powers, and do it herself so she can fight him. So she's moving from passive to I'm on the run to I'm going to fight and save the world. So she's coming into herself, which we can talk about. The overall story is definitely a coming of age, hero's journey type story. where she is going like, we gotta find the stag, and she's with Mal, who's an expert tracker, so great. they're going to track the stag. And then we move into what's the very beginning of the 4th section. You can argue that there's either 4 or 5 sections. I think there's 5, but 4 is very, very short. And it's just this brief period of time where she is active and she's chasing the stag and she's going to do this thing, but then she fails because she can't kill it, which, you know, is no surprise really for us. Maybe some of us wish she had, but then we would also hate her for being able to do that. And the Darkling catches up with her and does all the things that he planned to do. And that's I'm going to call it the second plot point, but it's the climax or the death moment of the book, where despite all of the actions of Alina, it all collapses and she's basically entrapped by him and she has to do everything he says. And for a while she does everything that he says because she has no choice. He's won, right? So 4 moving into 5, which is the end of the novel. And they kind of blend together. They're not as defined. You could argue either way. But I think that it's good to make the distinction between the 4, where it ends up with that plot point where we see that the Darkling has caught up and he's won, right? Because that's the end of that question of, is she going to get away with this? And then section 5 is the end of the novel where the Darkling is using her, and he's using her, and then she has a moment back at the fold where in desperation, she figures out how to shake him loose and use the amplified power on her own and fights back, and then they escape. And that's the end of book 1. Essentially, she and Maul go off. They escape the fold, and they're on the other side, and then they're basically on the run, and that's how we start book 2. Okay, so that's the structure. Hopefully that made sense. I was trying to go really fast. In the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means overall and how you can use it.